Day one in the second search for victims from the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre just ended, and our very own Vincent Hill is at Oaklawn Cemetery to show us what's different from the previous search that happened back in July. Vincent.
That's right, Mike. Today, a change in strategy. Instead of looking for mass graves, crews were focused on a much smaller area, looking to answer a century-old unanswered question.
Same effort, different tactic than before.
Based on their size, shape, and orientation, probably individual grave shafts as opposed to a mass grave.
The search now focused on victims known as the original 18.
These were fine, upstanding members of our community who simply wanted a piece of the American dream, but truly received a nightmare.
That's how Brenda Alford, a descendant of a Tulsa Race Massacre survivor, describes them.
Their names were Sam and Curly and Henry and William.
Scott Ellsworth is a Race Massacre historian and author of Death in a Promised Land. He says records show 18 victims are buried at Oaklawn Cemetery. Victims like a husband.
John Wheeler, for example, he was a porter who worked at First National Bank right there at 4th and Main. You know, he lived with his wife on North Elgin.
A driver.
We know that Joe Miller was a chauffeur.
And a musician.
George Jeffrey was a laborer and a piano player.
Ellsworth says he has the names of 13 of the victims, the others only described as
unidentified Negro, race riot victim, died of a gunshot wound.
Ellsworth adds they all have one thing in common.
They were also all homicide victims.
Mayor G.T. Bynum says after a century of wrong, he's committed to making things right for the victims and their families.
We should have been that kind of city in 1921. We were not. But we can be that kind of city in 2020, and we're trying to be.
Now, the search is expected to last at least a week unless we have heavy rains. Crews will also search around the Clyde Eddy section of the cemetery, hoping to find any victims from the Race Massacre. Live in Tulsa, Vincent Hill, 2 Works for You.
Vincent, thank you. Well, in 2018, Mayor G.T. Bynum announced the city of Tulsa would re-examine the potential for mass graves from the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. The project began this year, as we said, in July, and while their investigations came up empty-handed, they are continuing their efforts.